last but not least, I am so thrilled to introduce these authors, Valerie Saxton Sharpe and Roberta Strosnider. So Dr. Roberta Strosnider currently works as an educational consultant in the areas of executive functioning, learning disabilities, and teacher prep. She is Professor Emeritus of Special Education at Towson University. And Dr. Valerie Sharpe also currently works as an educational consultant in the areas of cognitive disabilities, executive functioning, and teacher preparation. Valerie was on the faculty at both Hood College and Towson University. Valerie and Roberta together co-founded Project Boost, a program to help students use metacognitive strategies to elevate their executive function skills. And they currently co-direct the Institute on Executive Functioning, which provides teachers with methods, including the use of metacognitive strategies to improve their students' executive function growth. I know you're going to enjoy their presentation. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, for your nice introduction. And thank you for joining us. Today, we will be sharing information regarding strategies that boost students' executive function skills. Please take a moment to read the objectives for this webinar. As you are reading, I am going to tell you a little bit about how we came to be where we are today. Our work began 30 years ago while we were teaching high school, and during this time, we noticed several students in general education who struggled to meet with academic and social emotional success. At that time, a term for their actions that we observed did not exist, but we knew from observing and working with the students that they truly needed help with skills such as working memory, planning, organization, time management, very much so self-regulation, communication skills, and the list went on and on. We also knew that without these skills in place, these students would continue to experience failure. So we began our journey to research and create strategies that could address their deficits and lead to these students' academic and social emotional success. Today, we would recognize these students as having executive function deficits. Throughout this presentation, we are going to be sharing stories of students with whom we have worked, but mostly we will focus on one student who we will call Josie. So here's our first activity. What we would like you to do, using a scale from 1 to 5, please rate your knowledge of strategies that boost students' EF skills. And we would like you to type your rating in the chat box. Okay, you can keep typing. I'm going to move on to the next slide. We'll be referring to executive functioning as EF throughout this presentation. And EF skills involve the ability to use working memory, plan, prioritize, organize, manage time, use appropriate verbal, written, and body language to communicate, initiate a task and remain focused to complete the task, and to self-regulate. If you think about it, these are the skills that you need to successfully accomplish your daily tasks. And here's what we know about EF skills. They are not innate, and they need to be taught during early childhood and continuing throughout P12 and adulthood. During the early years of a child's life, EF skill instruction primarily focuses on inhibiting skills to protect the child from danger. Small children must be taught to avoid dangers such as a hot stove, traffic, jumping on furniture, climbing, etc. And we continue to teach these EF skills and others as they're developmentally appropriate. We know that the causes of EF difficulties can be genetic. Often speaking with students and families, we find that there are other members in the family who are presenting the same issues. Or they can be environmentally caused, where there's a lack of instruction or modeling of these skills, and therefore the students have no basis to build upon. EF growth is also hampered by stress and anxiety that children experience. We also know that EF skills do not necessarily improve as a child reaches older ages, but research does show with appropriate interventions, EF skills do improve with long-term effects. There's still limited research tied to reading and mathematics specifically. However, attention to EF teaches students how to learn and benefit from instruction. Research also shows that interventions in content areas may not be as successful for the student if the student does not have sound EF skills in place. When we first started working with a student named Susie, she was in the 7th grade, and she was unwilling to try new tasks. And as we met with her parents, she literally held on to her mother. Her parents whispered that their expectations for Susie were much lower than those for their other children. As we entered Susie's dining room, which was the room in which we were to work with Susie, we were surprised to see that the room had been turned into an actual classroom. There was a large whiteboard, all the textbooks, computers, an iPad, timers, and other materials to teach Susie. Susie's parents shared that they worked with Susie every evening, and on Saturdays and Sundays, they hired tutors to work with Susie. As we began to teach Susie EF strategies, Susie looked forward to learning them because she recognized for the first time in a very long time that she was being successful. As her EF skills strengthened, Susie became more social in school and her academic performance improved substantially. You see here a list of authors who are prominent researchers in the field of EF. Every one of these authors recommends that EF skill training start as early as preschool. Diamond and Lee and Morgan and his associates extended their research to older age groups and found that early attention to EF growth would positively impact students throughout P12 school.
Hello. I too welcome you here. Let's start looking at this downward spiral. It can begin anywhere in a child's life, but when it starts, it can ultimately lead to slow self-esteem, anxiety, failure, dropout, and entry into the pipeline to prison. But we do not need to wait for a student to fail. We can help prevent students from entering the spiral with early intervention. We can also help students who are already in the spiral escape with intervention. Some signs that the downward spiral, students in the downward spiral might exhibit include not understanding what is being asked of them, starting an assignment too slowly, too quickly, or not at all, saying inappropriate things, or acting impulsively, making it difficult for them to get along with others. They may appear to have zoned out at times or feel that the work is just too hard. They may have tried harder for a while, but lacking success, they are further convinced there is no hope. They feel, why try if I'm still going to fail? Even with multiple reminders or reviews of these expected behaviors, without explicit strategic instruction, many students do not meet with success. Students and their parents often are aware of these problems, and think if they try harder, have tutors, or get older, they will disappear. They don't. As Val said earlier, recent research states that reading and math interventions are often unsuccessful if the problem at hand is actually EF-based. The teachers of students in the downward spiral may feel the student is not trying, avoiding work, and disrupting the class. All these thoughts and feelings must be acknowledged in a safe way before the student can improve. Collaboration is important among all the stakeholders, including the student, and communication is key. Why does the student feel this way? What do they like about school, if anything? When we met Josie, she was in the 3rd grade and was already in the downward spiral and did not seem to care. No matter what she did or how hard she tried, success never came. It took the work of all the stakeholders collaborating to convince her to want to learn. We have to ask and consider, is the instructional content appropriate? What about the delivery of the content? And finally, what strategies are needed? Fortunately, Josie was very interested in WOOBs, and knowing that led to conversations with her to reconnect her with learning. This is a chart of our categories. Val mentioned several of the executive functions earlier when she was speaking, and we have had them displayed in packed in suitcases and as spokes on an umbrella, and also in this chart form. And basically, we use 5 categories. And the first one is working memory. That is the foundation of all learning. One of our strategies that we use in working learning is a memory walk. Students getting up, going on a walk in which they are observing certain things and then coming back to class and debriefing. In terms of working memory, we're really talking about students storing the information, retrieving what they've already learned, and using that to learn new concepts and skills. So you can see why it is the foundation. Now, the next one, prioritizing, organizing, sequencing, managing time, and planning, can all stand alone, and there are books on each of them. As a matter of fact, the Big Rocks, Little Rocks strategy is a prioritizing strategy. But when you look at what the description is, and these are just a few of the characteristics, but the student might have trouble determining what should be completed first and how to keep their things organized, the order of things, meeting deadlines, having that sense of time. So that is a very important one also. The next one, attending, initiating, and focusing, is really set to getting started. So you have to attend to the assignment or the stimuli, then initiating, actually getting started. So you're looking at it, you're thinking about it, you're starting, but then also focusing, having the resilience to complete a period of time attending, initiating, and focusing on a set assignment. You see under that all set strategy, and that's a strategy that prepares students to be ready and to start and to focus when they are learning virtually. And you see some of the characteristics that students have if their AIF, for instance, is working. And that would mean they were doing these things that we have listed in the description. The next one, social, emotional, and inhibiting, is really having students understand their thoughts, self-regulate their thoughts, understanding their feelings, exhibiting appropriate behaviors, and recognizing and labeling those emotions that they are feeling. The pause strategy is one that you will be hearing more about this evening, and it is an inhibiting strategy for students who call out. The last of our categories is also a mix, and it includes communicating, cognitive flexibility and shifting, and our strategy that we talk about for the communicating, because we're talking about communicating in both verbal and written form, is the modified pre-writing strategy. And the cognitive flexibility and shifting, we spend a lot of time with our students on transitioning, but we also spend a lot of time on having them be able to accept change in thoughts and actions, as well as transitioning. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, Val, I said okay, and you did exactly what I asked, but we need to go back because I have something I need to ask our participants to do. Thank you. So, as you heard about these 5 categories, if you were thinking about a student, if a student's name might have popped into your mind and you thought, oh, that's, yes, so-and-so is having difficulty doing that, then think about that student again and think about how many of these categories the student would have difficulty in. And if you would number them in your mind and on chat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, from the left to the right, just quickly put a number of how many of these categories, these 5 categories, your student might be experiencing difficulty in.
It's interesting to see that there are multiple categories. And that brings us to the comment that executive function skill deficits aren't clean. It's unusual that you find a student who has just one deficit area.
And also, thank you for that, Val. And also, our student Josie had academic difficulties and social emotional difficulties, and clearly had difficulties in all 5. Not to say she didn't have strengths. She had strengths in a lot of areas, but in looking at the categories, she did have, for instance, prioritizing was a big one in that second block, and focusing was a big one in the third block. So they were across the board for her, but just not all the same in terms of description. Thank you. To experience executive function growth, students must have instruction, explicit instruction. And it isn't easy for them to move from not having these processes to self-regulation. And we are having as our goal for them to be able to self-regulate. So as you look on the diagram, you will see that metacognition is in the middle. The reason metacognition is in the middle is that it helps us with students to take their executive functioning skill to another level and then to ultimately be able to self-regulate. Now, the most problematic behaviors that teachers are called upon to address daily are those involving self-regulation across a variety of settings, to control impulsivity, and to remain attentive and focused to task on hand. And that's what we're getting to when we are working with metacognitive strategies on executive functioning. All of these executive functions that we have talked about are processes, and they allow the individual to interact with their environment across a variety of settings. But then, in order to have the student grow in that area, if an executive function isn't where it might be, where we would like it to be, we can use metacognition to develop strategies to help students make the leap to self-regulation. So in metacognition, we're having them think about what they are doing. And as we have them think about what they are doing, we also have them use self-talk, which is a tool that is successful in teaching them the process to get from the function to self-regulation. Data show that not taking the time to teach metacognitive strategies by front-loading them prior to instruction, it will lead to instructional time being lost. So by taking the time to load this process and teach them to learn, then they are going to be more likely to reach self-regulation. And when they reach self-regulation, that frees the teacher's time for instruction. And we do have to say that Josie was requiring a lot of teacher time. And I'm sure that you are thinking of some students possibly who require that also. And the teacher time was just trying to keep her from even causing other students to lose focus, let alone help her with self-regulation. So it is like building a village. Thank you. We talked about the modified pre-writing strategy when we're coming across into communication on the chart. And this is a sample of a metacognitive strategy. This could be a card that the student would receive, or it could be on a paper, a resource sheet. It could be on a virtual, and I'll show you those in just a few minutes, how we do that. But this is for the early elementary student. And look at the first word, think, 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 think about. And so as we teach this strategy to the student, we go through the steps and then notice that they don't start writing until the very end. And that is so important. And we know that there are a lot of pre-writing activities that people do, but this is the one that we're using to build metacognition into this particular activity for students. And you notice that there's a picture. And if the student cannot write a sentence about the picture, then we have them talk about the picture or draw another one showing what they think. So these are the steps for early elementary. And we're going to go to the next slide, which is similar, but notice that it's for late elementary to adolescence. Once again, students are thinking, they're planning, but it's more complicated at this stage. So they have the steps. What does the paper need to look like when I finish? And so you have your descriptions within of what they need to have as how they choose a topic, how long it's going to be, etc. Then what steps do I need to follow? And this is the student talking. What steps do I need to follow to get to that finished product? And certainly the teacher is involved in terms of directions and then what the student's steps that the student will follow. How long do I have to complete the assignment? And do I have questions or need help before beginning the assignment? So the student hasn't started writing yet. They're going through the process and the metacognitive process to get to the point where they can write the paper. So you may be saying, well, why are we spending all this time on this metacognitive process? As students get older, they have so much going on, they don't have time to do all this. But as students learn the strategies, they get to the point that they have strategy fluency. They can to bring it to mind, the steps in the strategy. And finally, they can generalize the strategy and use it in other classes, because we're going to be writing in all classes. So it is on a card or on a paper, and they have it and they can come back to it. So let's look at the next slide. And this is something that we were asked by teachers to develop. They wanted something that they could organize the instruction and the reminders for students after they have learned a strategy. So a sheet like this can be used at the beginning when you're teaching a strategy. It can be used after the student learns the strategy, and then it can be used also virtually or in paper form at the need of the student down the road. They may forget and they need to go back and look at their sheet about this particular strategy. And the one that we wanted to point out to you, if you can't see it very well, the steps of the strategy, how will it help you, example of when and where to use it, and then how you can remember to use it. So this is all for the student. And the one thing that helps us get buy-in from students to learn the strategy is to point out with them, help them determine how this strategy will help them. So when you see in early elementary how it's going to help them, it helps you to complete the pre-writing thoughts before you start and finish the assignment. You look at late elementary and middle school, and it's more complicated because they are going to have steps that they need to complete an assignment, and they will know how they are going to sequence them, those steps, and that will also let them think about this plan that they're making, whether it's logical. And then the next one for high school is, realizing that getting started is difficult when you can't decide on the topic. But if you don't have an assigned topic, brainstorming is a well-known activity for that. But it also goes beyond that, because the student makes a plan and they also think about how they want the end product to look. So it's working with the end in mind. And if you look at the sheet under this on the left, then it's the example of when and where the student will be using the strategy. And the last one is, how can I remember to do this? How am I going to practice and keep track of this? And so that is, we call them SSRSs. They're strategy support reminder sheets. And we wanted you to see how the sheet works, but we also wanted you to see how for the same strategy, you would be answering that second question so differently. And of course, the third also. Okay, thank you. Now, this is where we keep these memory supports. We talked about the SSRS, so it can be kept either in a tangible binder or strategy ring. It can be kept as, just a sheet, or it can be a card. And that was what was this on the strategy ring. But also they can be kept virtually. And so if you have a Canvas or another platform that students can go to obtain their work that is there, these can be there for them. And they have the link to get to these particular strategies. The picture shows you the tangible in terms of the strategy cards, and you see there on a binder ring. And then in the notebook binder sheet, you have 6 strategies. And that's because older students may not be comfortable carrying a binder ring, but they don't mind having business cards. So these are the size of business cards, while the strategy cards are a little larger and on the ring. All right. Keeping up with metacognition, let's look at the analyze, plan, do. The analyze, plan, do strategy is one we use with high school students. We use one called scan, plan, do with elementary age students. You can see that with that early elementary writing, it's never too early to start with having students plan, and in both scanning and analyzing the beginning of the assignment, then they go next to the plan, and that's where they're making their steps, and they have to gather the materials, and then they can start working. The do is then when they are working, and that's where we have asked them to not only use the analyze, plan, do strategy, but to bring in other strategies they know, like chunking, to help them. And we point out here that it's important to keep the track of their time, how much time they have left. And that's usually a visual that is provided them. And then to check how they're feeling about it and whether they need to go back and check the items. Well, they always need to go back and check the items after they've completed them. But maybe they need to go back while they're working, and definitely making those corrections where needed. So that is one of the metacognitive strategies also. In order to teach the strategies on the 7-step model, we developed this early on when we were doing camps and also in classes, because students and teachers both needed a guideline in terms of the process that we were going to follow. And when we developed this, we leaned very heavily on SRSD and also on the Universal Design for Learning, UDL. Harris's self-regulated strategy development was very important in terms to us in terms of how we would develop our model. And certainly step 4, teach the strategy. In this model you can use for an individual, a small group, or an entire class. You don't have to use all 7 steps for every strategy. We found once students became accustomed to this process and this procedure, they were able to, in some cases, set their own goals and develop a plan with our leadership. But it is teacher-led, and the teacher has to help the students know what their strengths and challenges are. Which are we going to start on? We said that all those 5, yes, they have a lot going, but those categories. But as you put them in the steps, then you can use, for instance, if you've made a goal for writing, you may have also made a plan that included writing and checking your work. So it is important to realize that it builds from the bottom, and we select the strategies with the help of the student, and then we teach the strategy, and Val will be talking about how we teach it. And then we assess the student's progress. Data collection is huge. We analyze and revise when necessary, and we always celebrate success. Sometimes you just choose the wrong strategy and you have to do some revision, but the key is getting to success. This is the Teach It strategy. It promotes students working memory skills because they may be reviewing for a test, and this is a way that they can do it. And they are working with another person, and the two of them take turns teaching the material to each other, or they can reverse and teach it to somebody else. But these are the steps, and it's the same for young students and older students. We have second graders who do this, and usually in mathematics, it has been very successful. And then the next slide, these are some other strategies that we mentioned PAW earlier. And PAW is popular with students. It's very helpful when students are having difficulty holding back from talking. They know that an answer, or they think maybe they know an answer, and they want to blurt it out. So as you see on the card, the student puts their hand in the air. They act appropriately, not saying, ooh, 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 me, and wait for the teacher to call on them. And we do a lot of role playing with this, and it has been very popular. We didn't think that students in upper elementary would be as interested in doing this, but they actually do like it. And of course, if you are using a cue, you can just say PAW. And one of the students that we worked with in third grade, I believe he was directed to tally each time he raised his hand and waited for the teacher to call on him appropriately. And so that positive spin is always the way we set our goals. The one beside it is stay, and that is to stop, think, and act. And the think part requires the students to think about how their actions might impact others and whether they want to take that action or change their mind. Josie benefited from thinking about whether her actions might be hurtful. And we have another, these three go together, and the next one is on the next slide. And it's SWIT, stop, wait, and talk. And this strategy supports them to wait before they say something. We know that words can hurt, and it allows them to think about what impact that word is going to have on the person they're saying it to. So with those three in mind, especially SWT and STA, it does cause them to stop and think during their wait time and then move on with the strategy. One of the things we use with stop, wait, talk is a traffic light. And you know that especially with the older students, they're starting to drive and they are thinking about, the yellow light is wait, wait, wait. And so we have that as their card rather than the one with the children. You see here on the left, the dragon quilt strategy. And the dragon quilt strategy is one that we use for younger children when something is bothering them. So they write what is bothering them on the card and clip it to the dragon quilt. And then they can stop thinking about it for a while so they can complete their work and then go back to it. Now, what happens with them is that they have time to think about what is bothering or exciting them later. They aren't forgetting it. They're just putting it away for a while. Same thing with what's on my mind on the right when something is bothering them. And they are writing it on a Post-it note and putting it away. And the next one is the I am able strategy. And students who are in danger of entering the downward spiral are reluctant to try new challenges. and helping them to set realistic goals and take risks is the purpose of the I am able strategy. You will see there are cards, tongue depressors, and a box to put the areas in which they have set a goal and they have tried something new. And then as they're successful, they can record it or they can put it in the box, put it in the can, and have it to celebrate their success. An example might be students set a goal to enter the room quietly for 5 days in a row. And if they do that, then they would put their depressor or as you see, some have flowers in the can. And with that, we want to go to our next slide, and Val will be coming back on to do that with you.
Thank you, Roberta. All right, the next strategy we want to talk to you about is the slant strategy. And this strategy has been around a long time. Ellis has completed multiple publications regarding this strategy, but it really deals with attention. And yes, students with ADHD do have difficulties with attention, but we know that not all students diagnosed with ADHD are the same. We also know that students without disabilities often find paying attention as being challenging. And the slant strategy was originally designed for older students. And on this slide, you will see how this research-based strategy works. So what I'd like you to do is please take a moment and read what the acronym SLANT stands for, and notice the vocabulary used for each letter. Now, this strategy is really to help students not only direct their teacher or their attention to the speaker or the teacher, but it also involves attending to a device and sustaining that attention over an appropriate amount of time. Now, earlier we made the comment that many of the strategies that we use and we have developed can be modified to fit various grade levels or to fit various student needs. And although the slant strategy is popular for older students, we felt that younger students would also benefit from knowing this strategy. So we modified it. And if you look at the vocabulary we use for students in grades 2 through 7 at the cards at the top, and then you compare that vocabulary to the words that we use for students pre-K through 1, you'll see that the message is the same, but the language is developmentally appropriate. And we found that the younger students really enjoy using this strategy. In fact, we have walked into classrooms and we've heard the teacher say slant, and immediately the students perk up and perform the different behaviors that are associated with slant. Sometimes teachers won't even say the word slant. Sometimes they simply use a cue, and again, they get the same impact from the students. And when they use this cue, they keep teaching and it doesn't interrupt their instruction. Another strategy that we use quite often is the self-check strategy. And we use this in a variety of ways. We usually have one card for feelings, one card for self-regulation, and one card for initiating and completing an assignment. And what you see here is an example of a card that we would use for students to initiate and complete an assignment. On the left, you would see the vocabulary that we would use for elementary age students. And the students on their card would slide this bead up and down to show their progress. It's a self-regulation, self-evaluation tool. It can also be adapted for secondary students. And as you see the slide on the right, you have the choice of designing it also using check boxes. And again, It's a self-regulating, self-evaluating tool, but it's a little more advanced in that now, before starting, the student has to actually plan and use metacognition prior to them initiating a task. Now, Josie didn't like using the beads, so we actually developed the check boxes for Josie's benefit. This is a great strategy. It's very flexible. We've also seen it used for behaviors or actions of students. And it's a great way for the students to easily communicate with the teacher, but it's also a great way for the teacher to communicate with the student. Okay, these two strategies we usually combine, the task analysis strategy and the backward mapping strategy. For the task analysis strategy, we usually have the students break a specific task into a variety of steps or phases. We find this task analysis process really beneficial for long-term assignments or projects, although we have used it for short-term assignments as well. It's a planning strategy, and it can be managed to meet the time management needs of the student. It's important to reinforce each step with the success of the student. So initially, the first step the student would do is look at the assignment and break the assignment into chunks or phases. Then they would look at each phase and estimate how much time it would take to complete that phase. The next thing the students would have to do is to go to the backward mapping portion. And with that, they would circle the due date of the project. And then they would proceed to fill in each phase, starting with the last phase, making that closest to the due date, and completing the time length for each, or the date and time for each phase until they get to the initiation of the project. And then they would continue to work on the project. We start this process, amazingly enough, with elementary school students. With kindergartners, we have them help plan a birthday party. They're familiar with a party, and so we break the process with them. We take them through putting the steps into order. Then we start the backward mapping process. For older students, what we usually do is the planning of a class event. We use a lot of calendars with our students and a lot of devices that have calendars so that they're familiar with both electronic and hard copy calendars. It's really interesting to see the progress that students make in terms of having success when they use these two strategies. It's great because the students see an end in mind. They know each time they complete a phase, they get closer to the task at hand. The other thing that's really beneficial is it eliminates a lot of stress for the student, and it also eliminates a lot of stress for their parents. Okay, earlier we mentioned about explicit instruction to teach a strategy. And a lot of times strategies do not work because they're not taught explicitly. And here is what we do in terms of teaching things explicitly. During the opening phase, the teacher selects the strategy that strengthens the EF skill need. And as well, the teacher designs a memory support, such as the strategy card that you saw or the SSRS sheets that Roberta shared with you. Once the teacher has completed this, she's now ready to move into the teaching part of the strategy. And when we teach a strategy, and that's the body of the work, we use the I do, we do, you do approach. And this is vital when you're teaching strategies. In the I do stage, the teacher has full control. She models the strategy, she uses metacognition as she's modeling, and the teachers watch, the students watch her doing this. Then we move into the we do strat component, which is when the teacher and the student work with the strategy together, with the teacher guiding the student. It's at this stage, and as the teacher observes the progress of her students, that she can move into gradually releasing some of this responsibility of using this strategy to the student. The last part of the body is the you do stage, and that is when the student demonstrates the strategy and continues practicing the newly acquired knowledge of that strategy. During the independent stage, the student has acquired the knowledge and participated in multiple practice sessions, which is key. And while this is happening, the teacher is collecting data. And that is at that point in time, the teacher is ready to see if the student is ready to generalize this use of the strategy to other settings. And finally, during the assessment stage, the student automatically uses the strategy without any teacher reminders. In most cases, this is a fluid process for the student, and the actions become automatic, but we can't rush any of the processes I've just reviewed. It's also important to remind the students at this point that they can easily access their memory supports and that they keep those memory supports close to them as they're learning strategies or they need to call upon a strategy, because this, again, reinforces the explicit instruction process. So by now, you're probably asking yourself two questions. The first question might be, when and where can I fit instruction into my day? And the second question you might be asking yourself is, when can I find the time to teach EF metacognitive strategies without detracting from my instructional time? Well, the things that we have listed here are tried and true, highly successful. Roberta mentioned early on that a lot of times we front load strategies because we are all about being preventive rather than being reactive. Does it take time to front load the strategies? It absolutely does. But we ourselves and multiple teachers who have gone through and started to use executive function skill training all have recognized the fact that our instructional time has actually increased because we no longer have to stop and redirect students, address inappropriate behaviors or actions, remind students of things and over and again. So these are highly successful. Many of the high schools are now putting in with their study skills classes, they're putting in actually EF skill training elective classes. And middle schools find that their school clubs are a very popular vehicle for teaching executive function skills. So we've given you a lot of information and you may be thinking, so how do I get started in the process? And the first thing you need to have is the backing of your administration, your department, or your team. And you do this by showing the research and also observing your students' actions and their benefits that they have shown you by one or two of the strategies that you've taught them. It's a great way to improve students' academic and social emotional growth. Once you have the backing of your administration or your team, the next step is to explain the process to the parents and to get their buy-in. Parents need to understand that these are strategies that will promote success with their children. And to be honest, we have never had a problem getting parent buy-in. The next phase is to explain the process to the students. And how do we do that? We take a really fun strategy, something like stay or swit or slant that they can physically act out. And we explain the strategy to the student and they begin to use it and they see that they're having success and we get instantaneous buy-in. From that, we have a selection of goals. Now, these goals can be selected by the teacher, they may be selected by the student, or it may be a combination of both. And from there, we move into a game plan of reaching the goals. We determine when to teach, we collect data, and we build in practice. So that's the process that we take our students through. All right, let's use the study cube strategy to summarize what we've learned today. I have a cube, and on the cube, each side is numbered 1 through 6 to correspond with the 6 questions listed on this slide. This is a great strategy for students to use when reviewing material they've learned. The student simply rolls the dice, finds the number of the question that they are to answer. If they can answer the question correctly, great, they've learned the information. If they have difficulty and they find the question to be a challenge, they then need to go back, review their notes or their textbook, restudy, and go back to the question and answer it again. So I'm going to roll the dice, and when the number comes up, I would like you to read the question for that number and answer it in the checkbox. Ready? Here we go. Number 3. So in the chat box, would you please identify one strategy that you can use with your students? Hey, while you're doing that, for time's sake, I'm going to move to the next slide. This is the last participation activity we're going to ask of you this evening. You recognize this scale, but this time, using the scale and rating your knowledge from 1 to 5 regarding strategies that boost students' EF skills, what we would like you to do is to type your number into the chat box. And if your score has increased or your rating has increased, please type the word yes next to your rating. If it has not increased, please type the word no next to your rating. And lastly, some food for thought. We always like to refer to Robert Fulghum's poem, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. This is a very popular poem, but think about this. When he talked about children learning not to hit others, was he referring to the executive function of inhibition? When he talked about teaching children to put their toys and materials away, was he referring to the executive function organization? When he talked about teaching children to follow rules and procedures, was he referring to the executive function of working memory? When he talked about teaching children to say they were sorry, was he referring to the executive functions of communication and social emotional? We have truly enjoyed working with you this evening, and we thank you very much for your time.
But yes, thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, and have a great rest of your week.